ClimateBiz. My name is Shari Friedman.
And I'm Marcine Mitchell.
Marcine and I both work in climate business at the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group and the largest global development institution focused on the private sector in developing countries.
Today's episode is focused on the latest initiative in green buildings, the zero carbon building. We'll be talking to Arthaland, who is a major real estate developer in the Philippines, about their plans to have all of their new buildings be zero carbon. And in previous episodes, we discussed what is a green building and why is it important in the reduction of global GHG emissions. So IFC defines a green building as a building that uses less resources, specifically energy, water, and building materials, than do traditional buildings. And our green building standard is called EDGE and requires a minimum of a 20% reduction in those resources.
In the building sector, while people often are focused a lot on the power sector and also on transportation, the building sector accounts for 28% of energy-related GHGs, so it's not insignificant.
No, it's actually pretty important, and it's growing. By 2050, buildings will require an estimated 50% more energy than they do today.
Today, the current investments in green buildings is only a fraction of the investment opportunities in construction. So most of the buildings are being built today are not what we would consider green. Global investments in green accounted for about $423 billion out of the $5 trillion spent on building construction and renovation in 2017. There's a lot of opportunity to do it differently. The IFC found about $24.7 trillion in investment opportunity over the next 10 years in emerging markets alone, and we highlighted that report in one of our prior episodes.
And this is a huge opportunity, and there's a need to do more. We all know that the UN's recent report on keeping global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius has said that we need to cut all GHG emissions by half over the next decade and be carbon neutral by 2050.
Right, so with all this opportunity, why is this not happening?
Right, so it's complex. It's a complex ecosystem that makes up construction and buildings. So one, you have this perception that building green is very, very expensive. And we're finding that it really is not so much, but there's a big education gap in terms of how much it really costs to build green. Then there's a split in incentives. If I am a builder and I put in these green technologies, the person who makes the savings is the owner if I sell the building to them. So I put the money in, but they get the savings.
But wouldn't this whole market value trickle through? So if the demand from the consumers is to be in a green building, then they're going to pay more rent than the person who's buying the building is going to pay more.
You've got it, exactly. And that's what our research is finding, that these buildings do sell faster and they do sell for more, and their long-term value is greater. But getting, again, that information into the system is difficult.
And we've been working a lot with banks on this.
We have, and banks, I think, is going to give us the opportunity to really scale that, and by developing these green products that can monetize these savings and can monetize these faster returns.
Right.
So it's very positive, but it's taking a while to get it through the system.
Right.
And given that there are no incentives, such as the price on carbon, or building regulations for efficiency in many places, it's slower.
And now we're leapfrogging, right? So now we're going from green buildings, which are more efficient, to this concept of net zero. And now that's this global trend going. And the UN came out with the Net Zero Carbon Buildings for All initiative, which was endorsed by the UN Secretary General and the UN Climate Action Summit. And it's calling for national and local leaders to develop and implement policies to drive decarbonization of all new buildings by 2030. So it's getting to the incentives that you're talking about. Like, how can we create the policies that drive this faster?
Right, and net zero is a little different than green certification of buildings. So green certification is what you do when you're building a building, right? And you're putting in these technologies to make it green. Going to net zero is operating. How do you operate that building? So hopefully the technologies help you reduce emissions or reduce energy at the building site, but you also have to operate it in a way that becomes carbon neutral. So that means going above and beyond, either putting renewable energy on site or buying it off site or having offsets. So it's an operating standard.
Complicated, but not really. Then there's places that are making it simple, right?
And the World Green Building Council, to support this, has launched their Advancing Net Zero project, which calls on building developers and owners and governments and all the other stakeholders to support the objective of having all existing buildings reach net zero operations by 2030, and to advocate for all buildings to be net zero in operations by 2050.
And it feels like that's really important because while it sounds like this trend is going to happen organically, it's just not going to happen fast enough organically. You know, what do all these different things mean and how do you become an operator? There's an educational component, there's a policy component, and it's organizations like the World Green Building Council and like the UN and like IFC's EDGE program that are driving it faster.
So IFC has signed on to this initiative, and we've created a pathway to zero carbon through our EDGE Green Building program, but the questions and the things you just raised are good questions for Arthaland. So let's see how this is happening in reality with a real-life developer. Today, we're happy to welcome Leonardo Poe from Arthaland to discuss the business case of building developers to move to carbon zero. Arthaland is a property developer in the Philippines, and it differentiates itself from other property developers by only building green development. Arthaland is the first in the world to achieve EDGE Zero Net Carbon certification for its flagship office building, the Arthaland Century Pacific Tower in Manila.
Leonardo Poe is concurrently Executive Vice President and Treasurer of Arthaland, which was founded in 2009. He's also Treasurer and Director of Century Pacific Food Incorporated and Shakey's Pizza Asia Ventures Incorporated. He's worked a lot in the marketing, finance, and operations of fast-moving consumer goods, food service, quick service restaurants, and real estate development.
We also have IFC's own Omid Saberi, who is one of our in-house green building investment specialists and the brain behind IFC's net zero certification. So we welcome both of you to
Marcin. And thank you, Marcin.
So Omid, let's start with the big picture, as we often do. So, Omi, you've been in the green buildings market for a while. Can you put green buildings in the context of total net building construction? So what percentage of total building construction is green buildings? And then of that, how much is net zero? And are you seeing growth?
Sure, happy to do that. So in 2019, the global building stock was equal to 160 billion square meters. And out of that, only 1 billion square meter being certified as green building globally, including developed markets, United States, Europe, and all developed countries. And if we look at the overall climate targets that we need to get to zero carbon by 2050, putting only 1% of global assets as green buildings is not enough. And for us to reach to the zero carbon target by 2050, there's no way we can achieve it with this level of green buildings. The other problem is that those green buildings are not zero carbon buildings. They are saving energy, but they are not getting to the net zero carbon conditions. So what we really need is to start moving in high scale towards certifying more green buildings, as well as having more zero carbon buildings. Are emitting around 15% of global emissions.
And when you talk about needing to get to this net zero, this is the target that scientists have set globally for everybody to get to net zero by 2050 in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So that's the target that you're talking about.
That is correct.
So that's the big picture. But on the individual developer, how are we moving towards that? So Leonardo, Arthaland is a big developer, a big mainstream developer in the Philippines. But yet you've made this commitment to do only green buildings going forward. So why is that? Where are you seeing the demand coming from?
I'd like to start by saying that Arthaland is leading the way for sustainability in the Philippines. Our company was founded in 2009 by Mr. Jaime Gonzalez, who is our vice chairman and president. And my family joined the business in 2011 when he invited us to become his partner in Arthaland. And the philosophy of Arthaland was really to leave something behind for future generations, which is what attracted my family to join the company. And the best way to leave something for future generations is by making all our projects green and sustainable, so that our children and our children's children will have a brighter future because of what we do today. So we started our journey with our first development in 2010, which was the Aria Residences. The Aria Residences is the first residential project in the Philippines to achieve LEED Gold and 4-star Verde. This project was followed by the Arthaland Century Pacific Tower, which is our first office development project. And we aim to build one of the most sustainable office buildings in the world. And we're able to achieve that by having it certified as a LEED Platinum building, 5-star Verde, and most recently with the IFC Edge Zero Carbon certification. And our commitment is that all our projects will be green and sustainable. Hence, our new projects, the Cebu Exchange and the Savia Financial Center, as well as our Savina Park Township development, will also be certified with LEED, with Verde, and with the IFC's EDGE program.
It sounds like it's in the DNA of your organization. It's part of one of your founding principles.
Yeah, sustainability is really at the core of the company and at the core of our business, right? So when we look at sustainable development, we see that a lot can be done in emerging markets like the Philippines. What we're seeing in our local environment is that there is a big demand for office space that started in about 2002 because of business process outsourcing. So there's been a steady demand for office space, and that's been steadily growing over the years. And it's actually one of the key drivers of the local economy. In 2010, when we started our development, there were only 10 LEED registered projects in the Philippines, and the Philippine Green Building Council wasn't even set up yet. Now there are over 100 LEED and Verde registered projects around the country. So there's been a growing demand for sustainable development in the country, but primarily in the office sector. We're doing it both in the office sector and in the residential sector as well. When we look at the landscape, what we hope to achieve is we hope to inspire other developers in the Philippines and other emerging markets to do the same thing that we're doing, because in doing so, we're contributing to the health of the global climate, right? So we're doing our part, and we're making it our mission to leave something behind for future generations, right? And the best way to do that is by reducing the amount of resources that we consume, and we try to offset whatever carbon that we produce with by other means, by supporting renewable energy and other renewable programs in order to reduce the carbon footprint of our company.
So it sounds to me like a lot of what you're doing, Leo, is mission driven. Like that you've really integrated the mission along with the business case. Ultimately, you've got to have a bottom line profit. So we'll get to that in just a second. And before we do, I wanted to go back over to Omid and check in on just to set the foundation again for the understanding of what we're talking about, because we're kind of throwing around these concepts of green building and then of net zero. And so could you, Omid, walk us through this progression a little bit on using the EDGE program? Because they're not independent things. It seems like there's a link between them and a progression if you can take it. So, Omid, do you want to go through the EDGE program and what that looks like and how you can go from one to the other?
So the way that EDGE program has been, the program that being used also by Arthaland to achieve the first zero carbon building by EDGE certified in Philippines. The way that we are trying to create the baseline everything starts from a baseline. We are developing baselines for every country. So the baselines are country contextual based and based on each building type. For example, the Arthaland office building will be compared to an office building in Philippines, similar office building in Metro Manila. From that baseline, the first target is to reach to 20% saving on energy, 20% saving on water, and 20% saving on embodied energy of the materials. That's the first standard, and getting to that level, one project can achieve EDGE certification. The next level up after that, for us to push the market again higher in terms of savings and GHG reduction, then we set another target, we call it EDGE Advanced. And on the EDGE Advanced, the projects needs to achieve at least 40% on-site energy efficiency. That's basically to push the boundaries on the maximum efficiency that the building can achieve using their on-site resources, either by making the building super efficient or installing some solar facilities to reduce their consumption. But after getting to the 40% efficiency, then the next step for us is moving into the operation of the buildings, which is very different in its nature to the design of the building. And in operation, what we are targeting is that when the building is at least 1 year in operation with full occupancy, that's the point we want the building to report their energy consumption against the way they are using the energy, or whether they are offsetting the carbon or not. So in the case of Arthaland, Arthaland used renewable energy to feed into their buildings for the 12 months. So it means that during that 12 months, whatever energy they consumed on site, it was all coming from renewable energy, and it means that it was a zero carbon operation. They can also use carbon offset or other means, or install more renewable energy on site and become net zero energy. So there are different ways of achieving the target, but at the end of the day, we are trying to create a standard that is flexible enough that you can certify in the middle of Metro Manila, in New Delhi, in Africa, in the United States, in Europe. Regardless of your location and the complexity of your building, you can always achieve by different means zero carbon certification.
So the first two, so EDGE and then EDGE Advanced, are all projected, certify at the point of the plan and of the building, and then EDGE Zero Carbon, net zero carbon, is when you're operating and you're making sure that any emissions that you might have are being offset, or that you're offsetting on site. So then you've got to, how often do you have to certify? Is it every year, every 2 years?
For EDGE certification and EDGE Advance, it's once. So you certify at the design and construction. So you certify the design, you certify the construction, and then it stays with the building. For zero carbon, if you are using off-site renewable energy or you're using carbon offset, every 2 years you need to recertify. If you are using on-site renewable energy, then every 4 years you need to recertify.
Given that you have a certified green build without being net zero, through EDGE or other certifications, why were you motivated to go as far as net zero? We see that that's an operational standard, it has check-ins, etc. So it's a little bit more work. Is there a differentiation in the market?
Primarily in the market. One category of consideration for our tenants was, at first, it has to be a green building, but certain tenants, particularly the multinational corporations that we serve, are looking for a higher standard of sustainability. And we are one of a handful of buildings in the Philippines that adhere to this standard. We are the only building in the Philippines, for that matter, that is triple certified. So we are LEED Platinum, we are 5-star Verde, and now we are EDGE Zero Carbon. So we have a bunch of multinational tenants that have really high profiles, and I believe that one of their criteria is really to add this to their ESG scores, right? That they're renting or they're locating in a building of such a high environmental standard for them to base their Philippine operations. And that has been quite rewarding for us, to the fact that we've been able to charge some of the highest rents for office space in the country. We're recognized in the market for our efforts to sustainability.
What kind of technologies did you use? And how did you kind of think through it and go all the way to net zero carbon? And do you have a sense of your projected savings, or how much savings you think you will obtain building this way?
Well, Let me tell you the story of this project, right? So this is the crown jewel, the property of the Arthaland Century Pacific Tower is basically the crown jewel of our company. So we decided to call this Project Jade. And in doing so, we had to build a project that would basically be the flagship for which our company will be known for. So we took inspiration from Project Jade in developing a dynamic building facade using triple glazed glass to create a beautiful but energy efficient building envelope. That was the first key step in the development of this project. We decided to work with SOM New York, who are some of the best architects in the world, in building this project. And we created a facade that was not only attractive, but also reflected quite a bit of the sun's rays to reduce the amount of heat that would go into the building. Then we coupled that with highly efficient air conditioning systems, together with energy recovery ventilation system, intelligent lighting, water efficient plumbing, a rainwater collector, together with a condensate water recycling system. By putting all of these features together, we were able to achieve a 45% energy savings and 64% savings in water. That's what allowed us to reach the EDGE Advanced certification of the IFC.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And you're seeing that a lot of them are paying higher rents because they're needing to report back on their companies that their footprint is low. And so locating in a zero carbon building allows them to say that the company who's your rental clients to say that their footprint is low. And that's where you're seeing the drive for this.
And what we did was we decided to source all our power directly from First Gen Bachmann, which is a provider of hydroelectric power via their dam in Nueva Ecija, which is a province far from Metro Manila. By doing so, we're able to offset carbon that we produce from our building operations.
And so did you still have to buy offsets, or did the hydropower that you bought just take you to net zero?
The hydropower took us to net zero.
Ah, okay.
Right. So, Omid, in the case of Century Pacific Tower, Arthaland both developed the site and operates the building. But in cases where the developer sells the building to another owner, then how do you approach them to go to net zero? Because you're working with the developer to get, I take it, to say EDGE Advance, but now you have to convince the new owner. Or do you work with the developer as they are in the process of selling and preparing them for the owner to take on net zero? How does it work?
Marcin, the point would be to convince the building owner to take the operational part of the equation out of the carbon, right? In that case, what happens is that either they can tap into renewable energy. Now, more and more renewable energy sources are available through utility companies, which makes it much easier. In many countries, including here in Washington, D.C., you can purchase your renewable energy from your normal utility provider. The other part that is slightly tricky as well is for us to shift our consumptions from gas or from different type of fossil fuel to electricity. So the same way that in the cars we say we need to have more electric cars, we need to have more electric buildings. And those electric buildings then can be easily switched to renewable energy sources.
So it sounds like it's best if you can work with the developer and get it to EDGE Advance to begin with, and then that gives the opportunity for an owner to easily move it to, or more easily move it to net zero. Let me switch tracks a little bit. Can we talk a bit about costs and financing? So, Leonardo, how important was financing in terms of, getting this building built? And was it different in doing it as a green building versus your regular type of financing? Was this a consideration or a hurdle when you had to convince your bosses, the CFO, about financing this building?
There is really no debate for us in terms of the type of project and development that we would build because we wanted to be an inspiration for others. So in order to do that, we had to show everyone in the market that it's possible to achieve the pinnacle of sustainability even in an emerging market setting.
But your bankers didn't give you any pushback on that?
The way we finance this project is similar to how we finance all our other projects. So that's really the profile of the company. And there was no incremental issues for us in terms of securing the financing because of the type of project, because of the location, and because of the demand in the market.
I understand that you guys also used a green bond. Yeah. And how did this certification play into your ability to use a green bond?
Well, we're the first non-bank issuer for green bonds in the Philippines.
Oh, that's great.
The reason why we were able to do that was because all our projects are green and sustainable and eligible for under the ASEAN Green Bond Framework. So that means that all of our projects, in order to be eligible for the green bond financing, has to be LEED Gold or its equivalent. So a portion of the funds that we've raised would go into the financing for this project, but mostly the funds that we raised from the green bond would go into future developments and our plan for recurring income.
Omid, it sounds like with Arthaland, the financing of a green product was not a problem. That is part of their mission, and given the quality of their building, it didn't come into play. But are we seeing more generally, in terms of banks, the support of green financing, and are they beginning to offer any kind of different financing packages for green products, distinguish between a regular building and a green building?
So international investment started from different international development banks like IFC, like European Investment Bank, EBRD, ADB. Most of these international banks started to set targets on their climate financing. For example, IFC's own target is to achieve 35% of our financing to be climate financing. But then this trickled down to commercial banks. And these green financing also is starting to provide some benefits to the developers or green mortgage home buyers in the retail side to go and buy or invest in green certified buildings. For banks, this is very attractive because the green building is the largest untapped facility under the climate categories. We have issued a report last year in terms of opportunity in green buildings, something like around $24 trillion global opportunity is there for green building financing. And banks are starting to recognize that, and banks are moving their financing towards green buildings. So if you are a developer, and if you are not aware of this, it's better to talk to your banks if you're talking to your own bank to mention that you are interested in green financing and you are looking at certified green buildings to be financed. So within IFC, we have a program to provide financing to the commercial banks. And that financing comes with what we call blended finance, which is supported by UK government. We call it a MAGIC program, which is market accelerator for green construction. And within this program, what we have is ability to provide a lower interest rate financing to commercial banks. And that's a lower interest rate then can be passed over to the developers that they're going to build buildings. Need there is to build buildings that are certified with EDGE. Once they are certified, they would have access to lower interest rate financing from the commercial banks, and we provide that financing through IFC.
And it sounds like what the idea is that you start to offer this blended finance, but eventually, as everybody becomes a lot more comfortable with this, we will move beyond the blended finance and banks will become more comfortable. And you have companies like Arthaland that are having demonstration projects and so showing that it's profitable. So my question to both of you guys is are you seeing this market moving, and how fast are you seeing this market moving? Are you seeing Leonardo, for you, are you seeing that other developers are in the Philippines are starting to pick up your lead, and then we'll move on to Omid for a more global take on it?
There are more and more companies and developers that are embarking in sustainable development. We've led the way towards zero carbon, and we hope that they follow.
And Omid, are you seeing globally, as you're dealing with all the different markets, are you seeing a trend?
Yes, after we certified the first project, which was Arthaland Century Tower in Manila, we are seeing more and more projects coming to certify with zero carbon. We have been seeing different types of clients like banks that they want to certify their portfolio of their own buildings to be zero carbon. We have seen clients that are coming in the retail sector. They want to achieve zero carbon in their retail projects. We are also seeing one-off projects that they are owners that they are very passionate to become climate leaders, and they are bringing their projects forward to zero carbon. So all types of projects we are seeing that they are moving towards zero carbon. So the trend is there, and there's more and more projects that are coming to certify zero carbon. And that's really exciting for us. Very, very exciting to see that developers are seeing the benefit, as well as the owners, building owners, that this is the future, and they need to catch up with the future.
Great. Well, this has been a really fascinating discussion. And we always end our podcast with what we call our fairy godmother question, which is, if you had a fairy godmother and she gave you one wish to make the industry more moving toward zero carbon, what would that wish be? So we'll start with you, Leonardo.
Well, I wish that more companies will follow our lead and embark in developing zero carbon buildings for our future, right? For the next generation. In Arthaland, we believe in building sustainable legacies, and the legacy that we would like to build is one where we have more zero carbon buildings around the world.
Great. And Omid?
My fairy godmother wish is a bit odd. It is for us not to have a job anymore at some point, that there would be every single building would be at zero carbon, operates at zero carbon condition. And at that point, they say, we don't need you anymore. At that
what
point,
do you do, Omid?
I'll go back to my father and do some farming then.
Sounds good. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. This has been a great episode, and we wish you all the best.
So, Marcin, what were your takeaways? What did you think was particularly interesting?
Well, I thought one thing that was fascinating was that the founder of Arthaland wanted to have a company that gave back and had sustainable investing principles. And so you don't really see that often in state development companies. And so the fact that he felt that was part of his purpose. This was part of their to be. And the shareholders, therefore, gave positive signals to them when they were looking for developments and developing their buildings in a sustainable way. So That was really interesting and different.
That is interesting, and it seems like their timing was good. So what they did is they positioned themselves as a first mover. First mover always takes a risk, and that risk will either play out because you hit the market right on or not. And it sounds like this was playing out because they're finding that they are able to pull in the rent. They are able to charge people more, which I found both interesting and good news, because hopefully then other people will follow. And that's what we're really after.
Yeah, I agree. The fact that market was confirming the founder's belief that sustainable investing is worthwhile and has a value was really good to see. The other thing I thought was that I learned a lot from was when Omid talked about how you had to go to net zero. So the key part of that was that to build a building that is as efficient as it can be to begin with, to put in the technologies to bring energy efficiency to a higher level and drive down the energy need. And then on top of it, to get to net zero, you needed to add in either purchasing solar or renewable energy and potentially offsets. It was just really, I think, a learning for how you get to net zero.
So you can't just decide you're going to take a building, build it inefficiently, and then slap on a net zero by buying offsets. The idea is you have to make a very tight building and then move over to net zero.
Exactly. And I think as the market recognizes that governments are going to be regulating this more, but there's going to be more value in having an energy efficient building because it's more expensive if you have to retrofit first and then add on the renewables and the offsets. So if you're buying a building that already is energy efficient, you're more than, you're halfway there.
That a lot with the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, where things are a key component. You're in a country where your country is that out as a priority, you are potentially putting yourself at risk if you are building an inefficient building because there could be regulations and standards then that require you to retrofit. As you say, that's much more expensive.
Well, it was a great show. So thanks to all our listeners for joining us. If you like what you've been hearing, please review us on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find show notes and much more on our website at www.ifc.org/ClimateBiz. That's BIZ. And as usual, please give us your feedback and suggestions, and we will post these on our website. Or you can email us at climatebiz@ifc.org.
The content producer is Ruth Hupart. Our news researcher is Elizabeth Minshew. The podcast is edited by our technical producer, Bupe Mumgota, and our intern, Javon Hanna. The music was composed by Crime Dog Revival and engineered by Tony Stevens and Kent Marcoux. Thanks again for joining us, sending warm wishes to you and your family to stay healthy. We hope to see you soon.